So every investor who's ever thought about buying a rental property has had some version of the same thought. What if this all goes wrong? That's not a weakness, right? That's actually good judgment. The investors that get into trouble aren't the ones who are afraid. It's the ones who skip the planning, trust the wrong people, let their emotions override numbers, right? So today we want to talk about how do investors actually lose money in real estate? Not the dramatic things that people use as clickbait on TikTok, but the real failure points in investing. And more importantly, we're going to talk about what separates investors who navigate that successfully from the ones who don't, right? So fear is a reasonable place to start, but it's not the place you want to stay. Nate and John, when you look at investors who maybe have had a bad experience in real estate, they've lost money, they've gotten burned, they end up frustrated. Is there anything common there? Any common reasons that that happens?
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit for John too. I mean, we've all lost money in real estate. We've all had crappy experiences, right? Like there's risk in real estate, right? I promise you, you're listening and you're watching this episode, you're going to have some shitty experiences no matter what you do
Yeah,
in
for
the
sure.
real estate world, whether you're a rehabber or you're buying rental properties or you're private money lending. So it happens. Obviously, our goal here at our company is to help mitigate that risk with you guys as investors. Um, we can get granular around these topics. I mean, I think failure points for most investors, it can be very individual. Um, one of the big stopping gaps I see for most investors is they read and they research and they do all the information dump that they ever need, but they never take action, right? Or if they do take action, they're not talking to somebody like an expert about it prior to their decision, right? Maybe they'll go to their financial advisor or their CPA or something who doesn't
Yeah.
even know about the investment real estate world, and they'll do everything on their own. And they might call a real estate agent. And I mean, this story's happened over and over where I've talked to investors and they say, "Yeah, I've owned a couple of rentals, but it was an awful experience." Well, what happened? Well, I pieced it together. I trusted the agent. I did everything myself. I found my own property manager. I didn't realize it needed a $30,000 rehab, right? And so what most of that can boil down to is, you lose money in real estate if you put a bad tenant in place and you have a bunch of rehab work or maintenance on the property, right? Those are the two biggest places people lose money in real estate, which we can get into in a second here.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I think about losing money, I also think about, a poor experience, right? And for a lot of newer investors, having the right expectation when going in and buying a piece of real estate, especially a rental property, right? Nate, you said if you're in this game long enough, you're going to lose money. Well, you're 100% true. At some point in time, there is going to be that project or that property that's, you didn't see something coming and it came and it nipped you in the bud. And the goal is to obviously try and mitigate as much as that's possible. And one way to mitigate your disappointment and mitigate your idea of how amazing this investment is, 9 out of 10 times everything's going to work out great, right? And, even with the properties that work out great, people are still going to be people, meaning residents are going to move out, right? There's going to be property turns. You're going to have to spend money to paint walls and replace carpeting, right? There could be a tree that falls on the roof. There could be someone that drives through the living room, right? Ask me how I know. And a lot of those things that I just mentioned are covered by insurance, right? But like property turns and things like that, they aren't. They're an out-of-pocket expense. And, I've seen so many investors be like, oh my God, I had to spend $2,500 or $3,500 to re-rent my property. And, for us, we've done it 1,000 times. So it's like, yeah, are you surprised? Why are you surprised, right? Like you knew the resident was going to move out. And if you've rented a property as the investor at some point in your life, which I'm sure you have, right? No one just jumped into home ownership. How clean did you leave that property? Right? Do you think that property probably needed to have like walls painted and like the floor clean? Yeah, it did, right? And it's going to be no different here. So having the right expectation that owning real estate will cost you money, but not nearly as much money as the value real estate will add to your overall wealth, right? So, just having the right expectations that there's a human being that lives in your retirement vehicle, and that human being experiences the same ups and downs in life, maybe even worse than what you have. And along with that brings some variability, and we just have to be prepared for it.
As I think you both bring up interesting points, right? It's about preparation on both
Yeah.
sides,
Yeah.
but in different ways, right? Like prepare yourself mentally that something is going to go wrong. It's inevitable. Prepare your expectations, be realistic in those. And then Nate, you were saying too, like the people that you see are the ones who just jump in, right? They've spent all this time reading, but they haven't really done the preparation part, the talking to the right people, the getting the right things in place.
Yeah.
Would you guys say when it comes to that preparation, like particularly maybe with a new investor, is there one thing that you see consistently investors maybe not doing right that you're like, every time you see it, you're like, well, that's going to suck for them later down the road?
Yeah. I think for me is most investors, newer investors, right? They're very expense conscious in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is, they're always looking for the cheapest property management. They're always looking for the cheapest products to renovate their house. They're always looking for the best deal from the best contractor, right? Because in their minds, right, all of these things should translate into better cash flow or should translate into a larger profit margin, right? When in actuality, long term, most of those things, the cheapest version of those things, whether it's building materials, contractors, or property management, it's just going to lead to disappointments. You'll wind up with higher rehab expenses than you should have, right? Because the contractor doesn't know what he's doing. You're going to have to fire him. You have to hire someone else. The products you use in the house, they wear out really quickly. So you have to replace them sooner, or the property manager just does a shit job. And then at that point in time, you're in a situation where, you have to evict someone or find new property management. So, upfront savings is not always long-term savings.
I think the number one thing that especially new investors make is they simply chase ROI, right? They're
Yeah.
looking for the highest, best, brightest, shiny object, right, out there. And I always like to quell people's expectations. This is not Bitcoin, right? Especially when you're buying turnkey, you're
Yep.
buying a front end renovated new piece of real estate, new asset, right? And I always tell people if they want the bright, shiny object, you can go do it yourself and you can chase those higher ROIs. Uh, but like John said, there's going to be expenses involved, right? And if you don't know what you're doing and you're chasing ROI and you're putting lesser materials or you're hiring, the handyman who doesn't have as much experience, but he's changing out your plumbing, but he's not a plumber, right? You could get into some issues, right? So I'll second what John says on, trying to hit the cheapest possible options there, but also just chasing a bright, shiny object is the number one thing I see most investors do. And a lot of people have really high expectations because there's so many people online talking about Section 8 returns and super high double digit cash on cash returns. And those can work sometimes, but nine times out of
Yep.
10, you want to have a fully renovated long-term tenant in place that, you're not replacing the roof year two.
For somebody maybe who comes in with the right expectations, right? They know, okay, I'm getting into this. Maybe there's going to be some difficulties I'm going to have. Um, they sit down, they're trying to do planning. Where are some other failure points that they might have? Like we've talked a little bit in the past about things like maybe over leverage
Mhm.
or emotional buying decisions. Have you seen those things come up with investors and
Yeah.
how can they mitigate that essentially?
Investors come to us a lot of times and one of the biggest emotional stopgaps they have is actually buying out of state and like out of their
Yep.
local area, right? There's this comfort zone of like, I need to see it and touch it and feel it and be around it. And
Yeah.
missing a swath of opportunity all over the United States, the Midwest and the Southeast, right? And so I think, from a fear-based perspective, right? Getting over the hump and getting over the fact that there are tons of opportunity out there in other parts of the country and also good reputable teams and companies to support you with that. It's exactly why we're here is to help you and show you that process. Um, you're going to open yourself up to a lot of opportunity. I've seen people go from only buying locally, super nervous, get their first rental property, and within, you know, 5 years, they own 10, 15 of these things, right? And that ultimately, I think we talked about chasing bright, shiny objects. And, when you're buying something that's turnkey, it might not be the brightest, shiny returns for you. But if you own 10 or 15 of these things over 10 years, eventually all those rents are going to go up. All those doors are going to get less debt, like the cash flows are going to work themselves out and you're going to be creating more income. So the whole goal is to own a lot of little widgets that eventually catch up in cash flow and the equity's there, and you have a safe, stable asset that, 10 years later still has a brand new, roof, has brand new plumbing, has brand new electrical, right? So
What about, so you guys both have kind of mentioned, John, you mentioned people trying to go cheap, right? And use cheap
Yeah.
materials. Nate, you talked about using someone who's maybe not a plumber or whatever. Where do partnerships come into this, like as a potential failure point, and how do we work around those?
From the standpoint of partnerships, right? Everything that you do in the real estate game is going to be partnership related, right? Whether that's with your agent, your contractor, your property manager, whomever you're dealing with. And you all have to be pulling in the same direction, right? In order to, you think about a team at work, right? In order to get that project done, y'all got to be pulling in the same direction, be very focused on your specific jobs, and then, do that job at a very high level, right? And there's two ways to kind of acquire those teams. Number one is do your own due diligence and have a lot of trial and error, right? You could get lucky and the first agent you work with is amazing. You could get lucky and the first contractor you work with is awesome. And you could get lucky and the first property manager you work with just knocks it out of the park. And boom, your team is there and they're all pulling in the right direction. Now, are we going to get lucky 3, 4, 5 times in a row? Probably not, right? So we're going to run into trial and error issues like we always do with everything in life. All right. So that's option number one is do it yourself, which is great. Option number two is insert yourself with a team that's been doing exactly what you're trying to do for 5, 10, 15, 20 years and has thousands of, finished products, right? Meaning properties found, properties renovated, properties under management to kind of prove concept, right? So you're not walking into that process blindly or without any understanding of how good that team is. So from a team standpoint, right? We in a partnership is we want to create relationships. We want to create partnerships with tried and true, what I would call vendors that ultimately are pulling in the same direction we are as investors to make sure that not only is our assets performing, but we're getting the service and the end product and the overall return that we want. And that's one of the big things, obviously, we do here at Turnkey Property Pro is try to cut out all that trial and error and just step you into something that has been done thousands and thousands of times. And there's a 95, 99% chance that it's all going to work out really well. So
hit the nail on the head. When it comes to partners and relationships, one thing I'll add to the experience of working with us is we have everything lined up for you, right? It's interesting when I jump on calls with clients that are new, they're like, "Oh, do you guys have a lender?" 100%. What about like LLCs? You understand it? Oh, absolutely. Right. We have a partnership for that. Do you guys have CPA? Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. We got CPAs for that. Like, so for as a newer investor, we have every piece in play so you don't have to piecemeal it together, right? So that's partnerships are critical, especially for our business and for supporting you guys as the investor. So it's not only from the property perspective. Yes, we have inventory, guys. We have 30 to 40 doors at any given time, typically to help investors buy and invest in. But we have from the acquisition, like I've said this a million times, to the rehab, to the management, to the lenders, to the asset protection specialist, to the CPAs, to insurance, to title. It's all there to support you. And can you recreate that yourself? 100%. You can go out and do that. You can start your own real estate business. We are here to be of service to those investors who don't have time or don't want to do that on their own.
I feel like the two biggest things you guys kind of hit on that cover all the different things we just talked about are like, first of all, mindset, right? Coming in with the right mindset and the right attitude of like, I know things are going to go wrong. That's okay. I'm also ready to take action. Something we talk about a lot, and we've talked about a lot on this podcast, which is planning, right?
Yeah.
And having a strategy in place. And so I think one of the things that really is a benefit for people when they come and work with Turnkey Property Pros is we help with both sides of that.
Yeah.
We're going to
Yeah.
sit down with you. We're going to make sure that you're ready. We're going to coach you through that. We're going to build out this plan and strategy to mitigate those risks, be by your side if something does go wrong. And then we've built those partnerships, right? So I think kind of taking a holistic view of this and recognizing like, Yes, there is risk. Yes, it can be scary, but that's exactly why we're here, right? To help them with that.
100%.
So for somebody who's like, you know, on the fence right now, they're curious, they want to start investing, but they're afraid, they're held back by some fear. What's the one
Mhm.
thing you'd want them to hear before leaving this episode?
Held back by fear. Fear is usually correlated with risk, right? Someone is scared to do something because there's risk involved, right? And that risk of unknown. So,
Yep.
what I always say is that pain of today has to become more significant than the fear of the unknown in order to move forward, right? And I just ask, I just tell investors like, what's the risk of doing nothing, right? The risk of doing something is you move in the direction of your goals, and there's a pretty high likelihood that you're going to be successful, as we just talked about, right? There's always that little piece that is going to, there's potentially something that could go wrong, but we will prepare for that, right? We'll put things in place to make sure that if shit does hit the fan, we can take care of it, right? Versus, what's the risk of just staying where you are? Right. Well, we might not be able to retire. We won't be able to build legacy. We won't, be able to create passive income for ourselves. Right. All of our money is going to be losing money to inflation. Right. So for myself, I always feel that the risk of doing nothing is always bigger than the risk that you take when you actually take action. So that's probably what I know it's a little esoteric, but that's fear. Moving beyond that fear.
Fear is a pattern, right? We all have it. One, I would say have a conversation with us for sure, right? We're not going to shove real estate down your throat. We're not going to be used car salesmen towards you. We will meet you where you're at because we were there too, right? Like I remember the first time I learned that people were buying real estate. I lived in California and I was like, people are really doing, they're buying properties in Tennessee. How the hell does that work? That makes no sense to me, right? That's what they're spending $25,000 on a down payment. It was scary to me just learning the industry, right? So it's a good reminder. Like sometimes you forget because we're in this and we're inundated with it all day, every day, that we're very used to it. It's very natural for us to have these conversations and talk about buying investment properties 2,000 miles away from where we live. Uh, if you're brand new, the one thing I would say is take some sort of action, whether it's a conversation with us, go talk to a lender and get pre-approved. It doesn't mean you're buying a piece of real estate tomorrow, right? It just means you have the ability to buy a piece of real estate.
Yeah.
Right? And so just taking that action, you'll feel better, right? You'll feel better about actually knowing, hey, cool, I took one step and I know I can qualify for a $200,000 rental property. So I would say one step at a time. It sounds cliche, one day at a time. Sometimes, in life, when you're going through really rough patches, it's like literally 1 minute at a time. So, if you're listening to this podcast, you're watching it, you're listening and watching for a reason.
Yep.
You're interested in real estate. You're interested in investing. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to that's like, yeah, they buy their first piece of real estate. And they're like, man, I wish I would have done this 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's never too late to start building a rental portfolio, right? So I would say take one small action, whether that's talking to us or talking to a lender, get a book, who knows, do some more knowledge base. But I would say do something, that actually moves you towards the actual uh, process of purchasing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Love that. You actually made me think of another question, Nate. You were saying how, for us being in this day in and day out, a lot of this feels so easy and natural. And you talked about kind of some fear you had when you first started investing.
Yeah.
You guys actually share maybe a little bit about that, each of you, of when you think back to the starting of your rental investing journey, what was the thing you were most afraid of and how did you get through that? How did you mitigate that? What's happened? What's changed over time? Why are you not afraid of it now?
I was young and dumb, right? I thought I knew everything. I thought that I could go out there and just, oh, this looks so easy. Like I got this. And, I didn't seek out help, even though help was like right in front of me and very readily and easily available. And long story short is first deal lost 17 grand, right? It's like, and I went through the process of trial and error, right? I learned by the school of hard knocks. And the reason why we're sitting on this webinar here today is to make sure you don't have to learn that lesson. And you have the ability to just be like, okay, like, this has been done thousands of times before. How do we not wind up losing $17,000 on our first deal? So, that's, I guess I didn't really have fear going into it, but I should have. I should have, and not fear like that would hold me back, but at least a little bit more common sense to maybe ask some questions and get a little bit clearer of a picture of what I was getting myself into before I just willy nilly pulled the trigger.
Yeah, and I'll take a little different angle because John has a different, much different real estate trajectory starting point than I did. Like I started with clients on the phones and learning real estate from a mentor. And like my fear initially was just being terrified just to have a real estate conversation, right? Just to get on the phone with an investor and say, okay, so you're interested in investing. Do you have capital base to invest? Right. Like that was terrifying to me. Right. So just getting over the initial conversation of having a real estate conversation was huge. I will say the first investment property I ever bought was turnkey, and I listened to the mentors and went through the process and went through the system, and it worked out fine. Like my first property turn was like $1,500, $2,000. And that's okay. Guess who took care of it? The property manager. So I didn't have to like fly out to Indianapolis and take care of it or do any of that work myself. So, but yeah, I would say for me, I was terrified, period, just to be in the presence and capacity of business ownership and people who were talking about investing. So, what did I do? I faced it and just took action, did something small, had a conversation, talked to a mentor. So.
I think that's great. I think it's interesting too, John, that you said you weren't afraid. Maybe you should have been. I think, oftentimes we think of fear as like such a bad thing, but fear is reasonable. And maybe it's not always a bad thing because that it drives a little bit of cautiousness. But Nate, like you keep hitting on, right? We've got to work through that. So
Yeah.
don't let the fear hold you back. Figure out why you're afraid and take action on that and take the right steps. So
Yeah, I think we hit the nail on the head. I would say,
Yeah.
I mean, listen, whether you decide to book a call with us or work with us here at Turnkey Property Pros, or you're considering doing this on your own, or you have some opportunities there with a local group or in a community, like do something, right? We love people making money in real estate, whatever capacity that is, whether it's with us or on your own. There's a lot of ways to make money in real estate. So if you're listening to this and you feel like you're ready, whether it's booking a call with me or calling your friend who's a real estate agent
Yep.
locally, do something. Just take action. We got you. We got you.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Nate and John. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next one.
Absolutely. See you guys.